everyone, and welcome to the Červená Barva Press reading series. And tonight we have Tara and Dawn, and I'm really excited to hear them read tonight. And in the chat, you'll see there is a sign up if you're interested in the newsletter, or also a new one I started with writing tips and writing prompts that will come out once a month. So if you're interested, if I know you, just let me know. And if I don't have your email, you can privately put it in the chat or just email me. So our first reader is Tara, and she's a National Jewish Book Award finalist and winner of Boston's Julia Ward Howe Award for young readers for her novel, My Real Name is Hanna. Her award-winning anthologies include the Rose Medal Press Field Guide to Writing Flash Fiction, How We Disappear, her latest story collection, was described as exceptional by Southern Literary Review. Tara received a finalist fiction grant from the Mass Cultural Council, and I give you Tara.
Thank you, Gloria. I really appreciate that you pulled this together. Gloria and I have known each other for decades now. I think I knew her even before CVP even existed. And she's not only a friend, but she's also a publisher. She published a recent novella that I wrote, The Bitter Kind, and very grateful to her for all of that. Also thrilled to be here with Dawn today. Dawn's one of my favorite writers. We've gotten to know each other through Flash and the Newburyport Literary Festival. We've done that a few times together. And this is her this is my dog-eared copy of her book that she's going to be reading from. It's really wonderful, and I can't wait to hear her read. Also, just a reminder that we are going to be giving away 2 books tonight to two best questions asked. We are going to do a Q&A because Dawn and I are really into discussing things more than reading. So think about, what kind of questions you might want to ask. You might win one of our books. So keep that in mind when you're hearing us read. I'm reading from my recent collection, How We Disappear. And I'm going to start with an excerpt from a little biography I wrote in fragments of Agatha Christie. Just some background on me. I grew up kind of like Gloria, reading a lot of Agatha Christie mysteries. And I loved Agatha Christie as a writer, and I was really intrigued before anybody else was in her disappearance. And I even wrote a paper on it in my senior year of high school. So when I realized that I had this disappearing theme when I was pulling the collection together, I went back and I remembered that paper and said, you know what, I'm going to do my own little take. Because there have been a couple of novels that came out in the last few years, but I want to do my own little fragmented biography. So that's what this is. I'm just going to read a few of the fragments. And the title is Agatha, A Life in Unauthorized Fragments. Every story is an escape story. Pyrenees, southern France. It wasn't the hard, dangerous edge of cliff that her mule traversed, for that was excitement. It was the butterfly that the guide pinned to her felt hat, still alive, fluttering in agony. She could feel its pain, hear its silent scream, but she did not want to hurt the nice guide, so she kept it all in till it came out in floods of tears. She did not yet know how to express herself anyway, so with relief it was her mother who knew what was wrong and finally unpinned the now dead Purple Emperor. Her mother, Clara, the only one who knew how to release her from the long bondage of silence. Howe, southern France. This time it was not a cliff, but the narrow hotel window ledge that drew her. Out the small window and onto the hard man-made parapet to escape a locked closet, a maid's punishment. She knew the guests would admire her courage and that the 2 girls she was playing with would like her even more. 4 stories down, Below, a woman screamed and pointed at her. Agatha still said nothing. She was learning her own power. Madge's tree, Torquay, England. Agatha took over her older sister's tree, branches drooping and encircling, dripping with lore and myth. Deep within, a thick branch bench that held the dreaming, otherworldly young girl, whose imagination stretched way beyond the confines of the estate. Tales of good versus evil, continuing the fairy tales her mother made up at a moment's notice. And her own friends, the kittens, she was one herself, and Mrs. Green, who had 100 dog-like children. It was here that the future writer taught herself to read at the age of 5, interpreting the black words on the white page as any archaeologist would study ancient hieroglyphs. Slowly, the key was turned in the lock. Paris. In music, Agatha spoke. She ran her hands over the ivory with skill and love, for she was speaking through the keys in the scores. At 15, everything she wanted to tell the world, she told through musical notes that someone else had written for her. But she could only speak in small spaces and to few people. She got lost in a vast, echoing theater. She could not speak to the number of people needed to fill that arena, or so she was told. She learned in Paris how to abandon what she loved. The Dare. While Agatha recovered from influenza, Clara encouraged her to write stories and handed her an exercise book. The Call of Wings, The Lonely God, all rejected. Then Madge decided to give her sister a task and dared her to write a detective story. Agatha accepted. Could this be the way to make money needed to keep her beloved Ashfield estate, now falling into disrepair? Could she type on her sister's Empire typewriter and communicate with the world in the way that she used to communicate through the ivory keys in Paris? Poison and Poirot. Her mother sent her away on holiday in Haytor to finish the mystery she had begun the year before, while Archie fought in the war. Agatha's tall figure haunted the moors, speaking into the fog, her red hair bespeckled with dew, hearing and channeling. What she could not say to people, she could breathe into the heavy air. She became her characters in the same way she had spoken to her girls, the imaginary friends she lived with as a teenager. Through the fog, a little man with a distinct mustache emerged and walked with her, and then in her. He was as different from Sherlock Holmes and the gunman as she could make him, but he was of her. He observed, felt alone, but conquered with his superior wits. He would show the world all she knew in her little gray cells. Later, she realized she made him too old. But how could she have known when she became him for the first time that in the end, he would outlast her? So those are just some excerpts from Agatha. So I'm going to close with a piece of flash fiction, since this is a very poetic, flashy group. And it's Black History Month. And I actually have a story in here about an African-American cowboy. I love history, and I had come across an article that talked about African-American cowboys. They did exist. They exist mostly in the Southwest, and actually there were some in Florida. They used to herd the cattle, and it was often a way for them to get away from the plantations and oppression. So this story is very loosely based on one of the people I was researching. But I wanted to finish this and read this in honor of the Black Cowboy. How do you thank a river? Bo's trying hard not to think about the future as he rides the trail to the Dakotas. It's getting harder to find ways to get longhorns through farmland and Indian land without running into barbed wire boundaries and busy tracks of hot metal being laid down across counties and prairie. His father, the only free Black man on the plantation, with no master's initials branded onto his chest, had taught Bose to rope and ride himself to his own freedom on the plains. Bose rides beside Miguel from Mexico, sharp Cree Indian with some French in him from Canada, and Will from across the ocean, but not Africa. Will is from a cold, rocky island. They ride and keep an eye to the same sky that covers Bose's stolen people. It's almost too easy now. He remembers when cowboys had to cut their way through thorny mesquite, chaps keeping them from being sliced into bloody meat strips. The land getting flatter and more open, but also more closed too. And Bose does not want to think about his place in it after it's all over. No more $40 a head for the steer, beef not gold anymore for the hungry northerners, not better than cotton like it used to be. Now the only future he wants to think about is crossing that red river. They plan on reaching it before dark. It runs up ahead somewhere, always the biggest challenge on the cattle drive. Longhorn too dumb to cross without being told to and shown how. The sun climbs high. They break by a small creek and drink sandy water out of their high-crowned hats. Bose listens, head to the ground, the shaking from outlaw horses coming to raid. Twice near this bend in the trail they fought. Will wears an eye patch. Miguel limps. But even the battles have slowed down. They roll tobacco in their papers, inhale, don't talk. They shared the same space for too many years. Bose remembers the early days. More white men drove with them. He was the one they forced across Red River first. Miguel, too. The crossing dangerous from melted winter snowpack upriver. White cowboys refusing to drown in it. Its red water not going to take their sunburned souls down with it. Bose lost many trail mates like himself to the red surge over many years. Then Texas fever came and took most of the white ones. Only White Will is left, not afraid of water. But he was always with the dark ones near the chuck wagon anyway. The river, late afternoon, running fast. Red dirt lines along the banks meaning it's gone down some. Bose gets off his dusty horse and walks to the edge of the red bluff banks. Digs his high boot heels into the dirt like he's going to rope a calf. Lets out a whoop that flies across the water. He'll go in first and bring those dumb steer across. His own freedom. He climbs back onto his horse, leans forward, and whispers into her pricked ears. How do you thank a river is what he is thinking or feeling when he spurs his mount down into the cold, roiling water that runs with the blood of his friends, knowing these waters lead home anyhow. And thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And thank you for mentioning about the book giveaway. So get your questions ready. And our next reader is Dawn. She's the author of 5 books, most recently, The Strange Case of Dr. Couney, How a Mysterious European Showman Saved Thousands of American Babies. Other books include 2 short story collections, a novel, and a memoir. Her stories have appeared in many magazines and anthologies, including Noon, Bomb, Conjunctions, Exquisite Pandemic, New American Writing, the Anchor Book of New American Short Stories, Best Small Fictions, and much more. And I give you Dawn.
Thank you. So this is actually book number 6, Boundless as the Sky. But I just want to say, Tara, I am always amazed at your ability to go wide and deep at the same time. It's just extraordinary to me that there's this breadth of your work that is, there's a kind of expansiveness and precision at the same time. And as I was preparing for this reading, though, what I realized is because I love your writing and I think of you as a very different writer from me. And I started just being hit with the affinities between what we were doing here, because you write about disappearances and disguises, and this is also all through this book. So my book it's a diptych. It's a two-parter. The first part is a woman's response to Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. I don't feel like you need to have read that book to read this book, but it takes you through a number of different cities, real and dystopian and historical. And the second part is a novella that takes place entirely in the very real city of Chicago on a very specific day. So I'm going to just show you kind of little pieces from throughout the book, which will kind of give you a sense of how it was sequenced and some of the threads that hold the whole thing together, which throughout are really elements of disguise and flight and feathers. So I started with my about the author I wrote as a flash fiction. So this is the author. She covered her face. She tore the damp stuffing out of the past and filled her fists with synonyms, flung words like confetti, like fairy tale feathers, repeating herself again and again. She believed in this way she could bring back the dead, if just this once. This is the first of the cities. It's called The Beautiful City of Serena. I actually wrote this before the pandemic. In the beautiful city of Serena, every old woman wears a mask. The body may yet appear lithe in slacks, in silks, in exquisitely calculated jackets, the gait still steady in the cleverest shoes. The hair is calibrated to perfection, dyed, snipped, and yet the face cannot be made to please the eye, not by needle or knife or emollient, unguent, pressure, laser, poison, paint. And so the old women go about in vivid masks, the poor in the primary colors, the wealthy in the jewel tones, garnet and sapphire, emerald, all of it fired in the city's famous ovens. Feathers may be added for effect. Time was the old women removed their masks at night in the dark, but now it is the law that they must wear them even to sleep, even to dream. The hands must be gloved, the toes must be sheathed. The old women may be 60 or 90 or 210. Despite their wild hues, no one sees them at all. The all-new sanitary city. Sneezing is illegal in the sanitary city. Also unlawful are sniffling, drooling, sweating, and sighing. Kissing, verboten. All of the walls in the sanitary city are stainless, wiped on the hour. Sheets on the beds are made of paper, all the mattresses defeathered. Many people come to the sanitary city for refuge from bodily fluid. Menstruation has been ended. Every insemination is mechanical. There is no fear in the sanitary city, no sorrow, no want, no unintended consequence. Nothing may swim from one life to another. Nothing may float from the breath to the ear. When I do a collection, I always like to throw in a wild card. So this one is a non-city, and it's called Far from the Sea. We lay in the tall grass, watching the sky heavy with birds, skin to reed to blade, a green prickle, an itch. We had nowhere to go. Breeze, but just barely. The birds, which were geese, seemed misshapen, chemically plumped, their natures disrupted. How many falls had we lain here together, scratching the earth we would one day lie under the sky? Did I say it was loud? Listen, he said. directive, a sentence, a place time goes. The second half of the book is the title novella, Boundless as the Sky. It's a novella in flash, and it's historical. It takes place in Chicago on July 5th, 1933, at the World's Fair. There was a World's Fair in Chicago called the Century of Progress. It's actually not the famous World's Fair that you think of with the Devil in the White City and the Ferris wheel. This one was at the bottom of the Depression. And something happened on that particular day in history, which is in the novella. But one thing I've realized when I've written history, and Tara, you've done a lot with history also, is when you start researching it, you realize just how fractured and fragmented our understanding of history is, and that there are so many things that have fallen through the cracks, so many pieces of it that have vanished, so many voices and points of view that have not been recorded. And so I was trying with this novella in flash to create a kind of kaleidoscopic effect of different points of view of people at the fair. And some of the characters are freak show performers who I really studied because they're people whose presences were entirely silenced. And this character is fictional, but she's based on a real woman whose name was Minnie Woolsey, and she performed as Cuckoo, the bird girl. And she was very nearly blind, and she looked kind of like her face looked bird-like. This is just the beginning of her story. She feels herself fly in the first few moments of waking, the wind on her face, her thin limbs, her few tufts of hair, as if the sky can hold her, lift her, carry her, and love her as nobody does. She has never seen herself, her reflection, and why would she need to? People have said what she looks like all her life. The world is light and form and shadow, a little bit of color, the warmth of the sun, the relief of the rain, the sweet and salty taste of food. Her face, she is told, looks enough like a bird that people will pay good money to look. She has never seen a bird. She has learned how to dress in a costume of feathers, how to strut and how to cluck, so they will laugh and then clap and then come back again and bring friends. Still, she doesn't mind it too much. Not like the place where she came from, with no light of day and no one to talk to and no one to listen, just everyday moaning and screaming down the hall, and hunger from eating nothing but mush, and some of it rancid, and her arms tied down and her body cut open so she'd never have a baby, and the scars she could feel with her fingers that were jagged and stank with ooze. The man in the night who did what he wanted, crushing her limbs, spilling her blood, spitting out names she will not repeat, not even in her mind. All of them believed she was incapable of speech because she never spoke in there. She wanted to die. And then she was summoned, taken. His voice was smooth. He had observed her, he said, and he had chosen her. She was worth money. He taught her what to do, first as the blind girl from Mars, and when that didn't sell, the bird. You understand me, don't you? He said. I bet you can talk if you want to, can't you? Call me Mr. R. There are others like her, plucked from asylums or rented from parents, but no one, he tells her, is just like her, and that is good. It is beautiful. Freaks, says Mr. R, are the royalty of sideshows. Rarer, of greater value than people who do things, swallow a flame, toot a horn with their ear. You are special, just for being you.
Thank you, Dawn. And so now it comes to the Q&A section. So I'll turn it over to Tara and Dawn. And so I hope you will ask questions and discuss things with them. And we'll see who has the best question.
Gloria's going to judge.
Yep. Oh, yes.
Pressure.
I know.
This is small enough that you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, I think. Go ahead, rather than do the chat.
I have a question. I'd like to know, Tara, how you first knew about Agatha Christie's disappearance. I read a lot about Christie when I was a kid too, but I don't remember if I ever heard that story. Seems like it's a more recent thing. So I'm intrigued to know how that came across your path.
Gosh, that was like 40 years ago, but I suspect it was because I was such a fan of hers that I went to read her autobiography. And in her autobiography, she sort of skips over that period, and sort of alludes to it. And so I obviously came across it there, and then I must have realized, oh my gosh, she disappeared. And then we didn't have the internet back then. So I'm not sure how I did a little more research. I probably did the old fashioned thing and went to the library, and found some information on it to do my paper. But I did draw heavily from her autobiography, but I must have found newspaper articles or something that, or maybe another biography that allowed me to do the paper that I did. So, yes, there was not much about it. I don't know if it was almost in honor of her wishes. She did not want to talk about it. So, and they're very English, very proper, so I suspect that has something to do with it. And, somehow, for some reason, there's a resurgence with her work and interest from the novelists. So
you were a detective. That's impressive. You yourself were detecting.
I am that I kind of see myself that way. I'm my husband knows, I say once in a while, I should have been in the FBI. I love those kinds of shows. I love trying to figure things out. The first story in the book is actually about a type of detective in this short story collection. So it is creeping back into my writing now, that love of mystery that wasn't there for many years. Thank you for that question. Paul?
Go ahead.
Well, okay. I just wondered, how much is there any identification with Miss Marple and Agatha? I mean, did she portray herself as Miss Marple?
No, I from what I read recently, and there are more biography books and people who've gone in to try and figure her out more. I think, as I said in the little fragment I did, they actually believe that Poirot was the most like her. She really identified more with him than with any of her other characters. And some of her work that's not mystery, some of her mysteries, she wrote almost more about her personal life. Some people believe in her mysteries and in her other novels than she did in her autobiography. So some people have gotten clues that way.
I have a craft process question. So listening to the two of you, I'm blown away by the exceptional writing skill for both styles of writing and voice and subject matter. And I wonder how much, if at all, a peer critique group plays in your writing process.
But Dawn.
So a lot. First of all, I revise and revise and revise. And this book, I have two things. One is I do have a critique group, And I also have a couple of just individual, really trusted readers who read all or parts of this. And I find it enormously helpful. Not so much, like I feel like I'm okay on a sentence level. I can just happily sit alone by myself and revise the same sentence all day long. But I just find often I'm working on something and I actually don't even see what's there, or I don't necessarily see the theme, and somebody else will just with it, whose objective will see it. And so for me, it's really important to have other people read the work. And especially it has to be people who I feel like I trust them, like that they kind of get me and they're not trying to turn it into their thing. They kind of understand what I'm trying to do and they'll help me get there.
Thank you. So at what stage in the development of a piece do you seek out or take it to a critique group or your trusted few writer friends?
For me, when it's pretty far along, or it's almost kind of at the point where I think it's as far as I can go. But it might be a piece. It might be like a couple stories in this book, and I think I've taken them as far as I can go. And somebody will see, a theme or something in there that it's like looking at, it's like you can't be objective about your own children. You can't be objective about the way you look in a photograph. I just find it really helpful in terms of somebody just kind of telling me where the opportunities and where the holes are.
Yeah, I actually no longer workshop with people like I did when I was getting a master's, and I think that I'm also an editor, as Dawn is as well. So I use critics, friend critics less than I used to. Part of that has to just do with life and where it goes. At this point, my husband's actually my main reader. Were you in English? You were an English major? Or you took English or literature? I mean, I know you
Spanish.
Right, but you took, read
Yes,
a lot of literature.
Plenty of English courses, yes.
Yeah. So he's convenient. He's right there. And he's very perceptive. He's not a writer. So I like to give him my work because he's looking at it from a reader's point of view, as opposed to if I gave it to a writing friend, which I will do occasionally. But like Dawn, I've learned to not show my work until I think I'm pretty much done, because you don't want someone to send you in the wrong direction or send you off track either. So.
Well, that's interesting. You both said that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what I found really interesting, what you said, Dawn, was that you look to the critique friends or friends who will critique your piece for what opportunities there might be there. I hadn't thought about that. Certainly I thought about gaps and about problems, but not opportunities. And that's very interesting. So thank you. Think about that.
Any other questions? Oops, we got two. I think Barbara went up first, then we'll go to Steve. Barbara, you go first.
Steve could go, doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah, you're on.
I'm not a particular prose writer, but I just finished a project where I had to do a lot of, what I found interesting was what you said about the gaps in history and the history that's lost. But mainly I wanted to know from each of you, when you're working on a project, how do you build that world of what you're writing? Like, what's effective for you to build it? Because that was what I found hard.
Dawn's more eloquent than I do. You want to than I am. You want to go first?
I don't know if I am, but So I had this book and my previous book, The Strange Case of Dr. Couney, take place in the early half of the 20th century. And I spent really an embarrassingly long amount of time doing archival research and immersing myself in it, and just to try to understand that world, because the past really is a country that you can't visit, and it's hard to look at it from our perspective and understand it. So it was, for me, just reading archival material, also reading books that were written at the time, what music was popular at the time, what fashions were people wearing at the time, what was for 1933, like I went to the library and read all the Chicago Tribunes for that month. It was just to try to, as best I could, immerse myself in that world, knowing that I really couldn't fully enter it. And I'm sure somewhere, somehow, there must be some anachronisms that I couldn't catch, but I really tried to get a feeling for it. And sometimes even like there's the historical characters, like there's an aviator in there and he's only in there for 2 pages. I spent weeks researching just him because I felt like I couldn't write those 2 pages unless I could feel him. So it was time intensive.
Yeah, both of Dawn's books are pretty remarkable with the history. We both share a love of history. Her only novel is set in Ukraine during World War II. And I was very naive. It was my first novel. I went into it after I was inspired by seeing a 1-hour documentary and started writing it. And I knew, because I had failed writing novels in the past, that I had to keep going with this one. And so even if I just kept writing whatever I could think of, didn't matter if it was any good, big gaps, big holes, lots of X's for stuff that was missing. And I had a first draft in 3 months. It took me probably 6 or 7 years of research then to go back and fill it in, make it presentable as a real draft. And I was particularly challenged with that book because I didn't realize how little information there was on Ukraine at the time, because the Russians came in after World War II and clamped down. You were not supposed to discuss it, no information against the law. So it wasn't until the 1990s, when Ukraine opened up again, that people were able to start talking and doing some research. So every year that I was doing research, more research was coming out. And even now, since then, there's so much. And so in terms of the short stories, when I do historical research, those are much easier because there's smaller pieces, but I love doing it. And I honestly like doing that more than the writing. And going back to Teresa's question, to me, I feel like a history detective when I'm doing it. And it takes you, what I love about it is you start researching one thing, and no Dawn knows what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And it takes you down as a rabbit hole into something else you discover. Like she said, all these hidden things and hidden places and hidden facts that we don't know about. So I love the surprises of doing research and finding things and then you get so excited when you found something that people may not know about and that you can write about and present to the world. So yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the historical writing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I was doing the book before this, which was narrative nonfiction, so it was a bigger press and I had an advance, and people said to me, well, why don't you just hire a researcher to do some of this stuff? And I didn't, because I thought that by doing my own research, there were all kinds of kind of peripheral things that I saw just at the edge that were so interesting and gave it a kind of texture and a richness that I wouldn't have found if I had just hired somebody to try to dig something out of the archives for me.
Yeah, Dawn's biography is nonfiction, obviously, but it reads like a novel. It's really well done. Highly recommend it. I actually have heard, I know some writers, some best-selling novelists in the more of the genre field, who have researchers who do all the research for them. They just do the basic plot, and then the researchers come in and have the stuff. So I guess it works for them, but I enjoy doing it myself too.
I would think that would take most of the fun out of it because, yeah, the research is the fun part. I just wanted to say thank you for answering that. And also, if you don't know about it, place that I find a lot of content is the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester. Mm-hmm. And you can get lost in there for days and days. So thank you. And I enjoyed both of your readings.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've tried to get their scholarship twice and didn't get it. So, but they're it's good resources. Steve, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I enjoyed both of your readings. Dawn, I haven't read you yet, but I will.
Thank you.
Tara, I guess my question for you is for both of you, actually, I mean, the COVID period now has really affected reading for me. I've joined so many online groups and read so many books in a group, and also benefited from that cross-pollination. But if writing is a lonely task, I'm just wondering how the COVID pandemic has affected both of you in your writing.
I guess I'll go first on this one. I didn't write much at all. I mean, I know that there were writers who threw themselves into their work. I was too stressed out. There was too much going on. A part of me almost felt guilty writing. I felt like it was worthless compared to people losing their lives. I did eventually get out of that, and that's one reason I came out with. I started a novel, but I couldn't go on with it. But the short stories, I felt, was something. It was smaller, it was more contained. It was something I could work on without my full brain being fully, in tune with being creative. So that's why my short story collection came out after the pandemic. And I know, I think just about every short story writer came out with a short story collection this year. Everybody was obviously doing the same thing. But I found it very difficult, whereas I do know some writers who were very prolific. I think it just depended on who you were and what your circumstances were.
Yeah, I wrote the novella during the pandemic, the title novella, and partly I was working as a research scholar at the New York Public Library. I was still doing research for some of the historical part, and in my mind, I was still toying around a little bit with whether maybe it should be nonfiction or I don't know. And then, of course, that closed down. Everything closed down. All the research that I was trying to do was archival and not online. And so there was no, and then I realized, well, from here, I'm going to just have to take it as a work of imagination, and it's going to be fiction. And I finally have to just take all this research and make something out of it. So I did write it during the pandemic, and I read Moby Dick. I'm so proud of myself.
We read that in a group too. Again.
Yeah.
Tell me, Tara, from the Tioga to the Red River, it's just, I mean, as Dawn said, it's just so wide. How do you put yourself in these places?
I love nature. I love landscape. So to me, I have a difficult time reading authors that don't bring some of that into their work, at least. I'm specifically talking about prose here. And so sometimes the interest in the setting comes before the story. And I have traveled a lot. I've been lucky to travel to many of the places that I write about, but I did not go to Ukraine. I did not go to the taiga. I do think the internet helps that now, where maybe you couldn't before. There's so many images you can see online, videos, films, little pieces, you know, you can visually kind of go to these destinations where you couldn't before. That definitely helps. But someone once asked me that, and I said that I feel like I'm an actor. You know, actors put themselves into their characters and kind of try to disappear and become the person. I kind of do that when I'm writing. I write to get away from reality to some degree. I really should have lived 200 years ago on some level. So when I'm writing, when I get into the minds of the characters, it's an escape for me, and I try to be that character. So I think that helps a little bit too. I try not to be myself writing the story, if that makes sense. I think Dawn can relate to that as well too.
I'm just thinking about that. So it's kind of the writing itself is like a way to disappear for you.
Yes. I think so. Yeah, I think we want to conclude with, you want to ask, you have a question for me, and I'll finish with my question for you.
Yeah. So, what can I do with it? Well, I know what it is, but it's just, I'm really interested in your, certainly with how we disappear, and my real name is Hanna, are, they're about erasure, they're about disappearance, they're about disguise, sometimes as a matter of life and death. And so I just was really interested in why this is, why do you feel it's such a strong affinity to that? Why it seems almost like an obsession.
Yeah, and it's not intentional whatsoever. And I didn't even really discover it until I put this collection together for the first time, and looked back at all my writing over the years and saw the connection for the very first time. I would say it probably has to do with being mixed heritage. My father's from India. My mother's basically European, and I grew up in, with a mixed marriage in the 60s. As the one of two families in all of our county, pretty much. We were very lucky on Long Island to not experience the kind of prejudice that my cousins experienced in other states. But there's still, I still have memories that must have affected me deeply of being in elementary school. And I was definitely one of those irritating, I know everything, raising my hand and answering all the time questions when a teacher would ask a question. And I was not shy at all about raising my hand and answer. And there were multiple times when a teacher would ask a question, I would raise my hand, I'd give the answer, and the teacher would thank a different student, literally. So I'd say, A, B, C, D. I'd put my hand down, and the teacher would be talking and say, Tom, thank you for that answer. I mean, it happened. It happened enough that it wasn't just one teacher or one fluke. So definitely that feeling voiceless. I experienced that, not to the degree that other minorities have felt, but enough so that it's important to me to give voice to people, as you talked about too, Dawn, those freaks. I just absolutely loved, your freaks. They were so well done, and especially you brought them to life in incredible ways, and so that I think I'm running out of words to say now because it's such an instinctual thing. But basically, yes, giving voice to other people who disappear, and that was sort of the idea behind the collection, was to draw attention to people who have disappeared. And the novel is the same way too, that people had to disappear sometimes to save their lives. And then from people who are trying to make them disappear. And I think it is also embedded in our society that we've got, the authoritarian, the leaders who are trying to make other people disappear, and then the people who have been disappeared try to have a voice. So that's the best.
So interesting. You turned around the idea that you said something and the teacher said, "Thank you, Bob." And so now you turn around and you're like, okay, I will speak as someone else. A little bit. Yeah. Like I will, it's like a reversal.
I may not be speaking as myself, but I'm speaking for other people.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I feel like I didn't have the most intense experience of that I know others have had.
Yeah.
But I've had enough that I can empathize in the right way with those characters, like an African American cowboy. I know it's sort of not the thing. It's other voice, own voices is more the thing to do now. So I'm kind of becoming extinct. But I was one of the first short story writers who did write about other ethnicities that weren't my own in contempt, in the last 20 years. And so anyway, I wanted to ask, I had a question for Dawn. I really genuinely am very curious about this. She did a wonderful event last night, and someone in the audience said that, I picked up your book and I'm enjoying it and I'm popping in and out and reading different stories. I'm not going in order. Am I going to miss anything if I do it that way? And you just said, no, don't do it that way.
Yeah.
I obsess about sequencing. It's so important.
I do obsess about sequencing, and I
totally get it. And I
know people do that. People pick up a story collection and they go for like, oh, what's the short one? What's the one that's 2 pages? But I do obsess about sequencing because there is not a traditional narrative arc, and they are not linked stories in that traditional sense. But there are little threads of things that go from what I read. There's the the feathers and the birds and the flight and the little things, and they are they're migrating as they move forward. And so it actually is really important to me that people read the book in order. And I constantly also, when I move pieces around when I write, and then I also look at, okay, where's the whole, what else needs to be here? What needs to be the link between this and this? Every story is answering the story before it. And sometimes the title of a story is picking up a line from the story before it. So they're all in conversation with one another. And so that's all. Please read from the beginning to the end if you're going to read.
Yes, definitely, because she also, they're like little mysteries embedded within there, little stories, little mysteries, little unanswered things that you have to go in order to, it builds, the tension builds, to the end. It is really, hers especially, you definitely have to read in order. But yes, I just saw you go.
So what?
Saw your reaction immediately when he
I
said
know.
that.
I was like, oh my God, that guy is my neighbor too. I was just like, I'm going to come over to your house and just.
Oh dear. So anybody else, or are we done? Any other questions? Well, this was a very fun Q&A. Thank you guys. Every one of you asked very good, smart questions. That doesn't generally happen. So I appreciate it.
It really was. Thank
This
you.
was
I really enjoyed
incredible.
being able to join you tonight.
So now, Gloria, you want to give out your.
Wait, Paul is raising his hand.
Oh, we got another one.
Go ahead.
Oops, you're muted.
Paul.
I'd like to mention that I haven't been writing much prose except for short stories, but I have 3 novels just sitting in manuscripts. The agent I had given up on them. But I translate sometimes from Hungarian, and I find it very difficult to describe an Eastern European village, even a city. Everything looks so different, you know, and then the author of these books takes it for granted that he doesn't have to describe the situation. But I feel that the reader will have no idea where this is taking place, because they have no idea what an Eastern European village looks like. And so how about you writing about Ukraine? You know, didn't you feel this frustration that
Yes. And honestly, that's one reason I made it. It's actually a young adult novel. So I knew going into it that writing an adult novel, that I would have to have even more detail and be judged on a different level. I hate to say that. So writing for young adults it forced me to keep the manuscript shorter and more succinct, and have not quite to have as much narration as an adult novel would have. So that helped me.
but
But
I feel that if you don't put the reader in a place where they can see where they are, you know, then you're not doing justice to that book. You know? And so I have to rewrite it in a sense, you know.
yeah, well, you definitely have a challenge as the translator, because the book's already been written and you've got to go in and put your own stamp on it. As an author, we get to be a little more creative. And again, like I said, the internet really helped me. I may not have been to that eastern village in Ukraine, but I had, and I'm sure Dawn did the same thing for the exposition. You have photographs. Thank God we had photographs, thank God for the photographers. And it's almost as good as being there sometimes. I mean, you may not smell the place, but you certainly are able to get a good feel with photographs and film clips.
But Terry, you're coming to it from an assumption that, especially for a young adult reader, that they haven't been there and they don't necessarily know what it looks like. So you're providing that for them. And I think maybe part of what Paul is saying is that when you're translating something, let's say was written in Hungarian originally for a Hungarian readership, then assumptions are being made that the reader understands certain things.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a cultural translation as well as a language translation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, for your question. And let's move on to the winners. I already picked two of you, so I'm really excited. And I know Tara and Dawn are also. So it's Teresa Brader and Karen Schauber. I'm not sure how to say your name. You both are the winners for your questions. And if you could leave...
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you could leave your, I know I have your email, Karen, so I'll get your address. And Teresa, I don't have your address to give to them. Do you know her? Tara or Dawn?
Tara has mine.
I actually have her address, but she should get Dawn's book because she has mine.
Okay.
If that works, right, Karen?
So,
I would love
Karen,
that. Thank you.
Work out okay.
I love that.
So
Thank you.
I just need a mailing address, and I probably will get to the post office on Monday.
Yeah. So Teresa, if you could send it. Yeah, send it to, or you could send it to me and I can forward it to Dawn. That makes it a little easier for Gloria.
Either way. Thank
that'll
you.
be fine. And then Karen,
So much.
I'll
That's such a
get
treat.
yours.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I know it. Yes, I'll give it to Dawn. Thanks, Teresa.
Okay, no
Okay.
problem. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So can we give Tara and Dawn a round of applause? What a wonderful night. Thank you
Wonderful.
so much.